Hi everyone, thanks for logging in. We're just going to give a few seconds for Venancio and Chelsea to join the chat. Hey Venancio.
Hey again.
All right, so I'll keep an eye on my phone while we are waiting for Chelsea to join. But for those who are logging in right now, my name is Olivia Maya Ortiz, and I'm a former educator at the School for Advanced Research's Indian Arts Research Center. But I'm back, and I'm here for another segment of our SAR Artist Live series, where we get to go behind the scenes into the workspaces of some pretty talented artists, which tonight includes Venancio Aragon. This program is partially funded by the City of Santa Fe Arts and Culture Department and the 1% lodgers tax. And before I continue, I'd like to introduce Chelsea.
Hi, thanks Olivia. Thanks Venancio for joining us. I'm Chelsea Farrar. I'm the Curator of Community Engagement at the University of Arizona Museum of Art. And we're just really excited to partner with the School for Advanced Research on this little mini series of Instagram Live talks, highlighting some really incredible artists that have worked with you all at the School for Advanced Research.
And I just want to mention I'm an alum of the University of Arizona School of Art. So if there's any students out there, bear down. So in upcoming months, the SAR Artist Live series will focus on Diné textiles and weaving, because later this year in October 2023, a new exhibition is opening. And so the exhibition's by Marlowe Katoney, and he's a former SAR Native Artist Fellow. He was our 2020 King Artist Fellow. And in anticipation of that, we're really excited tonight to chat with Venancio. He was also a King Fellow at SAR, and he's received his BA in anthropology from the University of New Mexico, as well as a BA in Indigenous Studies from Fort Lewis College. He's received several awards for his work from shows including the Herd Museum, Indian Fair and Market, the Bernalillo Indian Arts Market, and Swaya Santa Fe Indian Market. You may have seen his work before in museum settings. Past exhibitions include Color Riot, How Color Changed Navajo Textiles, and that was at the Herd Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. And also Tangible Intangible at K Art Gallery in Buffalo, New York. That's just to name a few. So before we get going with our conversation, I just want to remind folks in the audience that this is really meant to be an informal and educational program. Please feel free to utilize the comment box at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions or comments, or if you just hear something that really resonates with you, feel free to use the heart emoji. We welcome all of the feedback and good feelings. So with that being said, hi Venancio, welcome, and would you like to introduce yourself in your own words?
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here, and I'm very pleased and grateful to see that Navajo textiles are, being, carefully examined in not only museum or anthropological settings, but are sort of taking a place within modern American art and the fine art world. So that's very honoring to me as a weaver, as a Navajo weaver, to all my people and my ancestors.
Thank you. For folks who might be unfamiliar with your work, can you just tell us a little bit about how you got started and some of your earlier influences? I know your mom, Urbetta, was, one of your first teachers.
Yes. So I come from a long line of weavers. It's something that's in my family on my mother's side. But as a child, my mother didn't weave anymore. She was working wage labor to support the family. So it was in grade school. I don't remember. I was probably about 10 years old. But we had a cardboard loom project from school, and I took it home. It was like acrylic yarn and cotton warp and, very cheesy popsicle sticks. And my mom says, let me show you how to put a design in that. And so it was kind of baffling to me because I didn't know she was a weaver in her, earlier years. So I got interested. And by that time, my grandmother, her mother had passed away, and her weaving toolkit was dispersed among all her daughters. So my mom took me around, and we went to all my aunts. And we asked them, would you give us those tools back so we can reassemble my grandmother's toolkit so that I can teach, me? And so from the back of closets and drawers and chests, these pieces of my grandmother's toolkit was reassembled, and that's how I began to learn from my mother. Of course, when I went to school later on in college, I studied under Patty Savinac at University of New Mexico, and so my world was open to this universal human language of textile arts, and there are many forms and fashions. So I learned as much as I could from many sources. But I'm a Navajo textile weaver, so today my work is about the documentation and preservation of rare parts or less practiced parts of my people's weaving repertoire. And so my work as an artist is not an unbroken line of continuity, but it's a story of revitalization of something that was nearly lost within my family.
I think like that connection to history that you celebrate in your work and the way that you talk about your work, just hearing you talk right now, I think is really fascinating. I think I've heard you use the phrase looking back to look forward. So in this like manner that you speak about like your work and your practice, you clearly have this great love and respect for these Diné traditions and histories connected to weaving and even beyond, but also looking to support and even teach younger weavers today. So this contemporary practice that you're really interested in. So I wonder if you could share a little bit more about like what motivates you to study historic textiles and access to museum collections.
Yeah, I suppose it's the area I come from. I'm from the Four Corners, the New Mexico side of the reservation. And as you may or may not know, the archaeological record of the Southwest is so incredible, for a lot of reasons. We have visible archaeology, the climate, and so perishable items such as textiles usually don't survive the archaeological record. But from where I'm from, we've had the great fortune that those things are very well preserved. And so early on, I've always had a big interest in archaeology, ancestral Pueblo history, my own people's history. And, growing up as a Native person, a Navajo person, a Diné person, weavings are something that we all have in our households. They're like a quintessential Navajo art form. And so that, sort of spurred my interest in it as well. And then learning the techniques and, the actual practice of it, it goes beyond just, the memorization of those technologies, but you begin to understand more that weaving is not just for us Navajo people, some craft or, some art form, but rather it interconnects, it interweaves, so to speak, with our, our spirit, our worldview, and our Navajo philosophies and our spiritualism. And I think that's important in terms of decolonization. To preserve our textile heritage is to, strive for a decolonial sort of way of living. And so that's why I teach weaving and try to keep the art form alive and all parts of it, dyeing and etc.
I've seen you work at the IRC before, just accessing textiles, studying them and looking at them. And maybe you can share a little bit about the mindset that you usually, take on when you are accessing some of these pieces, which folks in the audience may or may not be aware that often in some of these older pieces, they have been chemically treated, often with arsenic spray. It was a terrible way to treat textiles and very outdated. And modern day collection practices don't do that. But, once it's been treated, you can't undo it. So what do you do when you're dealing with these older pieces for your own studies and observations, and then you have this other barrier that you have to address to access?
Yeah. The odd part of that curation history of textiles is that the ones that are in great shape, that are just wonderful, as if they were taken off the loom last week, those are usually the ones that have all of that caustic chemical treatments and so on. But going into collections, personally, I feel very honored to be among those pieces, because I think the weavings carry on so much from the people who created them, the thoughts and the emotions that they had while they were weaving them are part of those pieces. But also, you know, examining weavings up close, seeing the dye types or the yarns used, it gives clues to the material conditions of people in those time periods. You know, looking at Germantown yarns, or if you're fortunate enough to see something dyed with indigo or cochineal that comes from, you know, the sort of the older end of Navajo weavings that we have in collections. Those are phenomenal pieces. But then you start looking at, you know, the nuances that only a weaver's eye could see, you know, the ways that the yarns were, you know, spliced together, or the carding methods, or whatever it is. And it's just amazing to see the detail that each weaver put their, you know, their personal touch within. But I think as far as collections go, you know, we go into these spaces and we want to learn from those pieces, and that's the great fortune of having places like the Indian Arts Research Center and various museums around the country. But, you know, in our sort of indigenous philosophies, you know, nothing is meant to last forever. So in some sense, those spaces are, you know, these houses of, you know, prolonging the inevitable, which is that those weavings and those ceramics or whatever they are have a life cycle, and they're meant to go back to the earth if they wanted to. So, you know, it's kind of weird to see them kept and keep going. But on the other hand, as a textile researcher, that's why you're there. It's lovely.
Yeah, double-edged sword, right?
Double-edged sword. Yep.
Yeah, coming from a museum where we're trying to preserve things forever and ever, it's a conflict. But a really important thing to reflect on, right? So kind of continuing that thought of, like, you know, like going back to history, that seems to really influence your work. I'm really fascinated when I've heard you talk about the influence or the impact of the trading post era. And I kind of started to think of, like, these folks who, you know, had these licenses to operate a trading post as almost like the curators of you know, kind of practice in museums that are influencing, you know, what gets displayed and what doesn't get displayed. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, maybe for some folks that aren't as familiar with it, like what role did these trading posts have in kind of creating a consumer culture for weavings, obviously brought by colonialism as settlers were moving out west. Like how did that play into the aesthetics and designs of weaving?
Yeah, I think most people would say, you know, the trading post period is just revealing a relationship of power. And, you know, once the Treaty of 1868 happened, after the military conquest of my people, you know, the traders came in and they set up shop, and it became sort of Diné people's, you know, main outlets for business, for operating within this new capitalistic paradigm. And, you know, the traditional economy of animal husbandry, intertribal trade, and so on was totally disrupted. And so people had to adapt to this new way of life. So those early weavings, the transitional weavings from the trading posts, are sort of, you know, giving us a window into a changing world, a changing landscape, changing economy, and changing material conditions of people. And the iconography and the materials come into play. That's why when you go into collections and you see weavings from this early period, you know, 1870s, 1880s, you know, they reveal so much about the weavers' lives of those times. And you just need the trading post people coming in, and, you know, they didn't really have this need for, you know, wearing blankets or these things that were beginning to be mass produced elsewhere. So there was this shift from utilitarian items to, you know, this construct of a rug. So I personally don't call my weavings rugs because I don't make them for the floor. So, you know, these textiles that we know as rugs, you know, they were undergoing this transition to make them more marketable to off-reservation, you know, areas where they would be consumed and purchased. And so, you know, the size and the shape of textiles change, but also the availability of machine-spun yarns from the east and the arrival of synthetic dyes via the Santa Fe Railroad, it really just spurns this incredible development of weaving. Now, some traders encouraged, you know, revival-style aesthetics to maintain what was at that time traditional, right? this concept of, you know, Native people being stagnated in time, and so they wanted to keep that going. Other traders encouraged, you know, the adoption of new iconography from other cultures like Persian and Middle Eastern and Asian rugs, and you know, that would make them more marketable. Some traders preferred color arrangements like Lorenzo Hubble. He wanted that beautiful crimson red that we know as Ganado red weavings today. So, you know, there's a wide range of traders, not all men, some women as well participated in this, but they did have such a power in, you know, dictating the direction of how weavers were going. But what we do see is that weaving never became commercialized. You know, there was attempts where, you know, they had catalogs and pictures that you could order out east and say, I want this type of weaving, you know, and a design on it. And the weavers, you know, some of them would try to replicate those things, but there was always a twist. There was always some individualism or creativity or disruption to that normativity that weavers insisted on doing. And so you never see, you know, Navajo weavings just becoming these monolithic patterns and designs because they're so individualistic to the person who is making them. In our tradition and culture, weaving is the manifestation of one's thoughts onto the warp and weft. And I think that sort of resistance and that disruption of trying to be normalized is a very Navajo thing, you know?
I love that. That was centuries of knowledge condensed into like 2 minutes.
Well, thank you,
know.
social media.
You can take the bread, Venancio. We're just grilling you here. Well, I think, you know, the time that you and I have spent together in the collection space, it's just really beautiful to see those unique, they're almost like, you know, personal signatures on each work. I'm forgetting the term, and this is going to serve as an educational moment, but usually when you are finishing one, you know, with one string and going to the next, within Diné weaving, you usually see like a small line that kind of trails, and I don't remember what that term.
Well, I believe you're speaking of what's mistakenly referred to as the spirit line. And in Navajo weaving, and it's usually a break in a border of a piece that has a border. That's the way that most modern weavers would see them. But while I was working at the Heard Museum in Phoenix for the Towards the Morning Sun exhibit, we learned that, you know, there could be many types of these, what we call holy paths or weaver's paths. In Navajo, we call something like teen, the holy road or holy pathway. And, you know, they're meant to be breaks in a piece with borders that you don't lock your thinking and your consciousness and your creativity within that single piece. And if you look at older Navajo art forms like basketry, you know, the wedding baskets, there's usually a break within the sort of rainbow circle, the red rainbow circle inner part. And that's meant for the same thing, to avoid trapping oneself within those work, because you do put a lot of yourself into them in Navajo philosophy. So ceramics as well, a lot of Navajo older cooking pots will have a rim, and there'll be a break in the rim as well. So it's something that was adopted from older Navajo culture to fit this new iconography of a bordered textile.
I think that's really good to touch on. I'm also thinking of something a little different, but I'm just going to follow up with you later to remember.
Okay.
Another artist was telling me, yeah, but I think that's perfect to touch on. And I don't know, you mentioned materials earlier when talking about the trade post. Maybe you can tell us about how you harvest your materials or buy them. That's also harvesting them, and maybe some of the educational things you do with other folks and teaching them how to harvest their own materials.
Yeah, I think when one, you know, goes to like a modern day trading post or one of these curio shops, you know, you're hard pressed to find textiles that are hand spun and hand carded wool, like home processed. And I think today what we see is the vast majority of weavings being produced are made from commercially spun and synthetically dyed yarns. But that's just a product of people needing to eliminate those very time consuming steps of actually, you know, spinning your own yarn, which probably takes longer than the weaving itself. And that's how people actually are able to make a profit off their work or to make a living off their work. So I myself, I use a lot of commercial spun yarns, but I also keep up the spinning tradition as well. And I do teach a lot of spinning. Recently at the Flagstaff Fiber Art Festival, I taught a three classes of spinning, Navajo hip spindle spinning. So, you know, it's almost an art form in itself that's becoming very endangered these days. And so, you know, if you're in the fortunate presence of those weavers or those weavings that are made from hand processed yarns, it's something very special that I don't think either trading posts or the art world pay enough attention to the very sort of nature of taking these fibers and twisting them together to create a yarn. That in itself is one of our oldest human technologies. It's something that unites all of us in our diverse cultures, that all of our ancestors were doing something similar with fiber. But we don't pay more for weavings that are hand spun. That's not something you see at trading posts very much.
Yeah.
You know, kind of, but not as fortunate.
Well, I think the way you work with materials is a perfect example of what it means to be a modern day indigenous artist, right? There's always misconceptions about how if you know, are purchasing materials, you aren't harvesting them in a way, then it's not traditional. But at the same time, what do you do when some of these materials maybe aren't accessible for various different reasons? So I think that's really awesome.
Right. No, yeah, a lot of our people that are weavers today live off reservation, and they live in cities far from our homeland, and so you might not have the fortune of accessing those materials. So, you know, myself, my interest with dyeing came from when I was in Albuquerque at the University of New Mexico, you know, so I didn't have all of the plants that I normally knew, so I would experiment with what was around. So I used, you know, like ornamental tree leaves on campus, and I'd go to the grocery store and, you know, clear out the onion bin for the onion skins and go find turmeric and Kool-Aid and things like this. So it's another sort of, yeah, adaptation that Navajos are always good at adapting. Indigenous people, we adapt to our surroundings, and so that was, you know, my modern adaptation, but there's many weavers doing this as well today.
That flavor Kool-Aid though.
I know, I just had like a sensory moment of like, that weaving must have smelled very good, intense, and amazing. Yeah.
Yep.
I want to touch on the comments. Someone said, keep up the amazing work, brother, and heart emojis, and someone said, have a great night, everyone. Good night. That was an early bird. And someone said, yes, so well said.
Thank you, everyone. Yes.
Well, I know you brought a weaving. I'm wondering if maybe we have time for you to talk a little bit about like what you're doing now, your contemporary practice. You have, I think, your signature style that you've described as like an expanded rainbow aesthetic. So maybe you want to talk about what you're working on now, or and how that relates to that style that you described.
Yeah, I think myself a lot, as well as, you know, half of, you know, Indian country right now is getting ready for Santa Fe Indian Market. So that's our big event, and so I think that's what we're all putting our thoughts and efforts to. But yeah, my style emerged from, you know, the ways that I was taught weaving from my mother, to be creative and, you know, individualistic. And, you know, with the dyeing and the colors, you know, we have this sort of idea, this notion again of like what is traditional. And, you know, a lot of trading post people today look at weavings that have really strange colors like lime greens and electric purples and so on, and they tell you upright that, you know, that's not traditional Navajo weaving. It's like, wait a minute, who are these non-Navajo people, you know, dictating to us Navajo people, the weavers, what our work is supposed to look like? Yeah. So, you know, just by using lots of color and experimenting with dyeing, I came to this moment where I had so many colors that I just didn't know what to do with them. So I looked to the natural world to find a way to order them, and the rainbow sequence really appealed to me. So that's how I began to weave these rainbow pieces, and it would later become the expanded rainbow aesthetic, where today I think my last count of my yarn bins was like upwards of 250, 275 colors of yarn. So yeah, I have a piece I can show. So maybe this one is a good one. I may have to back up for a second, so bear with me. There you go. Very cool. It's a piece that you know, a lot of our work today isn't just patterns, as some people would say. I think a lot of you know, pictorial weavers that weave imagery and scenes of Navajo land, you know, I think in a lot of ways they have sort of more control of narrative because they can put an image that is easily recognizable to people. But some of our work has, you know, individualistic family traits or the weaver's own interpretations of what they see. And so the discourse and the narrative isn't as easily discernible in non-pictorial pieces, which I say I do. I'm not usually a pictorial weaver, but I find my work, you know, moving towards this area where I can, you know, put a different narrative out there. So here's another one, just in case we have time. This is my
we definitely have.
my series called Rainbow Corn. And I think these older pictorial styles, you know, they were done quite a bit in the past. And for some reason, you know, they fell out of favor, and we don't really see a lot of corn imagery being produced these days. So I think maybe that in itself is a reflection to, you know, we're losing connection to our agriculture and to our food economy and the, you know, the sacredness of corn itself. And so I think maybe that reflects in the subject matter that's not being produced today. So that's why I wanted to weave these you know silhouettes of corn against my expanded rainbow aesthetic background. I think it's a very powerful statement. Let's see here. I got one more. It's kind of a cool technique. And
You're getting a lot of comments that say, wow, amazingly beautiful, and I love the rainbow corn.
Very cool.
Beautiful.
Back to School for Advanced Research.
Someone said, that's so beautiful, love the corn imagery. My mom says, beautiful.
I'm doing my little Kilroy moment over here, but yeah. But while I was doing my fellowship at SAR, there was one saddle blanket. It was just a fragment, and it had, you know, two different twill techniques in one, which I really fell in love with. And, you know, as tattered as it was, I was able to sort of reconstruct what, you know, the concept was, and I've been applying that to my own work. So combining different twills and hybridizing these different techniques is sort of the direction I'm going into, as well as with my color work too. But, you know, I started doing my rainbow twill weaves, and, you know, they kind of took off because a lot of my fellow artists and my own people recognized that it was something very new, because twills were usually done in 2 or 3 colors. And, you know, doing a twill in 250 colors is something very unique that I'm very proud of, to say that perhaps it was my, you know, contribution to my people's textile repertoire.
It's quite tedious. I remember one time we were in the collection space, and I can't remember what we were looking at, but you uncovered a pattern that you thought maybe you had innovated, or, you know, something like that, and to realize it's been done before, which isn't to say you aren't innovating new patterns and whatnot, but I think, you know, like, yeah, one day someone will look at your work and be like, oh wow, Venancio was already doing this.
Well, no, that was a great, it was a tufted saddle blanket, and it had, you know, dyed churro locks on it, and I had been doing that for years before my fellowship, so I thought I was like radical and, you know, very cutting edge. But then I find this, you know, this saddle blanket with lime green churro dye, dyed locks from, you know, the 1870s or whatever, and I was like, wow, very humbling that, you know, there was creativity in my people, you know, years before. But that's the beauty of those collections, is that sometimes we can revisit things that have become forgotten or less practiced.
Yeah.
So yeah, very, very wild there.
What a
You are a
beautiful
future
way to
ancestor
remember,
too.
like, how connected you are, though, too. That's super powerful.
Oh, very much. Yeah, very humbling experience. Yeah, that, you know, we're different people from different time periods, but the weaver's hands, you know, this similar thing comes out, which is kind of amazing.
And comments are saying, fabulous weaving. Oh, the exquisite rainbow palette. I love how it feels when my eyes move across, and lime on, and the twill reverberates. I know we're running short on time, and one thing I just wanted to touch on, in all the work you're doing, we can't overlook with weaving histories, gender roles, and, you know, the art form. And so how do you reconcile modern day mainstream conceptions of gender roles with weaving, and what, you know, traditional indigenous views are?
Yeah, I think we're at a moment now where we're able to have these adult conversations within our communities, you know, Native people to Native people, Navajos to Navajos, where we can look back with these concepts that were applied to us from the Western gaze and Western normativity, Western heteronormativity, about the role of male and female, people and their connection to textile arts. And I think a lot of Western anthropologists looked at us and they saw mostly women practicing this art form. And so it was interpreted through this idea that this craft or this feminine occupation is mostly a female thing. But we as, Native people, we look back to the various, oral histories and the creation stories that have survived. And we come to relearn that, a lot of the teachings that came from our deities, Spider-Woman and Spider-Man, they were both passed down to, all genders of people. Even Navajo people have other concepts of, beyond just the two gendered peoples. And I think we're at that moment where we're trying to, decolonize these ideas that were applied to us and perhaps have the conversation about how maybe we have internalized some of those Western concepts about male and female occupations as they relate to textile arts. And so I think we're at this moment where, it's a developing topic. But if we look and do a survey of weavers, say at Santa Fe Indian Market or the Herd Market, and the list of weavers that are there, you'll be very impressed to know that, there's quite a lot of people that are male weavers that are at these shows, as well as female weavers, and some people that identify as other, which is pretty amazing as well. So yeah, I think it's an important topic, but it's something that I think we need to have more sort of kitchen table discussions about, and how it relates to our decolonization of our people and trying to reclaim those beautiful expressions of gender that we had in the past.
So thank you. And so we're getting close to time, and someone's asking if you'll be set up in Santa Fe next month.
Yes, I will.
Yes.
I think my booth number is 523 SFTE. So if you're in Santa Fe, I'm on the plaza. Come find me.
Well, I'm really glad we could have time to chat tonight. And I'm really looking forward to see where your, creative practice continues to go. I think for me personally, reflecting on it, it's so interesting because I see where you are moving, kind of like you said, to more of this abstract, modern design, pictorial imagery. And
I don't know either. I don't know either.
I could see it bordering like more of the pictorial traditions that we've discussed. Is what my personal thought. Someone says very interesting.
Right?
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and skills. Well, I definitely think it's pushing some boundaries in a good way, and it will stand out. And Chelsea, do you want to touch on anything, or Marlowe's show?
I'm just so grateful for you sharing your time, Venancio, and just some, again, like decades of knowledge condensed into, just a couple of minutes. I wish we had more time with you. I'm so grateful to learn from you. And I'm so excited that this is our build up to what is going to be an absolutely amazing show with Marlowe Katoney's work opening in October. So I hope folks continue to join in and learn more from more artists, and then come join us throughout the year, October to March, to celebrate another incredible weaver.
And that's at the University of Arizona Museum of Art, for those who logged in late. So Venancio, we'll see you at Santa Fe Indian Market. Anywhere else where folks can follow you or keep up with your work?
Yeah, I'll be at Santa Fe, and if you want to keep up with my work on social media, you can find me on Instagram. And I do have a website. It's venancioaragon.com.
All right. Well, with that being said, we'll close out, and I'll see you soon, both of you, and everyone have a great night.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Venancio.
Take care.
Night.